Okay, so you are going to need a blank sheet of paper to write notes on. We're going to talk about like all of the pieces of a parabola again, and then we are going to review something that we did back in January, February, and we're going to start to bring a bunch of things together. So every day I'm going to start out by lecturing about like parabola features and what they look like, and then I'm going to bring back a skill that we've learned from the past, and we're going to start to connect them all. So this is a parabola review. So the first thing we need to understand are features. We know that a parabola makes a U shape. And if it's a U shape, this is an upwards, it's a concave up, and it's positive because it's happy, it's smiling. If it's a downwards U shape, it's a negative and it's sad. Okay. We know that a parabola happens on a graph. And so if I gave you a point right here, and gave you this U shape, there's a couple of places that are important. Okay, so some important places are where it touches the x-axis. Where it touches the x-axis, that is called x-intercepts or roots. Okay, I'm going to redraw this. Where it touches the x-axis is called x-intercepts or roots. Okay, where it touches the y-axis is called a y-intercept. This point down here at the very bottom, at the very tip, is called a vertex. And then there's this line that goes through the center that we call the line of symmetry, or axis of symmetry if we're being proper. Okay, so these are all the features. This is what it looks like, and we're gonna have to remember those because I'm gonna take a day to talk about something different. I'm still gonna give you features to practice with. We did that all last week. I'm gonna give you a few more problems this week on it. And we're gonna talk about if I give you something in factored form. So quadratics have 3 forms. They have standard form, they have factored form, and they have vertex form. And we've learned about all 3 of these forms already. Okay, so we started with factored form in January. We then went to standard form in February, And then we did vertex form all through March and in our distance learning. Okay, so I'm going to write the formulas for that. Standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c, where c is my important point. It is the y-intercept. A lot of times in my classes, I'll write this with just blanks because some of you do better with that. And I will talk about this as the first number, the second or the middle number, and then the last. For factored form, I tell you, you know it's factored because it has parentheses. It usually has an equals 0 there. It'll have an x and an x. And then these pieces are the opposites of x-intercepts. It can get a little more complicated when we put a number in front of the x, but we've talked about that, and when we come up upon it, I'll talk about it again. Then we have our vertex form, which I write like this, where that first piece is an opposite x, and that last piece is the same y of your vertex. It's called vertex form. It makes your vertex points. So I'm going to start by giving you factored form. I'm going to talk about what that gives you automatically, and then we're going to talk about how to go from factored form to standard form. We need to be able to do this because factored form only gives me x-intercepts. And eventually, I'm going to need that y-intercept as well. You're going to need to be able to do all of these things. So if I give you something like negative 3x plus 2x minus 1. There are a couple of important things going on right now. The first important thing is that negative. If it's negative, it means this graph is sad. It is a downwards U shape. Okay. We have these pieces right here. Those pieces create my x-intercepts. And we're always looking for the opposite. So I get my x-intercepts are negative 2, 0, and positive 1, 0. Notice how I take the opposite of the positive 2 to get the negative 2. Notice how I take the opposite of the negative 1 to get the 1. Then there's always a 0 for the y because it's an x-intercept. Okay. Then, in January, we practiced if I give you parentheses next to parentheses. This means multiply. And when we multiply, we do it in a box. Okay. If you look up online help videos, it will probably tell you something called FOIL or double distribute. Although these are options and very good options, a lot of our tests are based off of this multiplication model that is now that box. Okay, so you're looking for the box method or the area method if you're looking at extra things. So I get 4 boxes, and the reason I get 4 boxes is because I have the x plus 2 times the x minus 1. X times x makes x squared. X times 2 makes 2x. X times negative 1 makes negative 1x. Sometimes we can write like without the 1. If you want to write the 1, you can. Then I have negative 1 times 2 makes negative 2. Again, this is a review from January. We spent a whole month on making these boxes. So, when I go to pull out of the box, I'm going to add. Okay? So this is like adding to my family. I get 2x minus x minus 2. Okay, so notice that when it didn't have a sign, I put a plus sign. When it did have a sign, I put that negative sign. Now this is not in standard form yet, because those two things right there can combine. So 2x minus x gives me an x. Now that makes a standard form, except I still haven't taken care of that 3 in the front. Since all of these came out of the box, they all get put in parentheses, and I distribute in. I get negative 3x squared minus 3x minus 6. This is going to be the important part, because that's going to give you your y-intercept. Your y-intercept, you have no x there, and you keep the same y. So you keep it as a negative. Oh, it's a positive though, sorry. Because a negative times a negative makes a positive. Okay, so we need to go over what it looks like to move from factored form to standard form. Okay, so step 1. Is draw a box. Step 2. Place your parentheses on the sides. Step 3. Multiply the sides. Step 4. Add all the boxes. Step 5. Combine like terms. Step 6. Multiply a lead number if needed. That's my negative 3. See how it's a lead number, how it's outside those parentheses? Then you have your standard form. Notice that -3 is your A, -3 is your B, and +6 is your C, which is the same as your y-intercept. Okay, so I'm going to go pull another one of those problems just to make sure you got it, and then I'll lead you to do your delta math. Okay, let's do a positive one. Okay, so because we're talking about features, we're going to talk about like all of this together because we're trying to work forward to being able to do a bunch of things at once. So because this is positive, it makes a U shape that is upwards and happy. This is factored form. I know it because I have 2 sets of parentheses here. I'm trying to go to standard. That means step 1 says make a box. Okay, the reason my boxes have 4 slots is because of the x plus 9 and the x minus 5. We deal with that 2 later. We bring it straight down. So that was step 2, is place parentheses on sides. Okay. So I'm multiplying. X times x makes x squared. X times 9 makes 9x. -5 times x makes -5x. -5 times 9 makes -40. So then I pull all of those out of the box to add them. X squared plus 9x minus 5x minus 40. Then I'm going to combine like terms if I have them, which I do. Okay, now this looks like a standard form, but it's not quite yet because we had to bring that 2 down. When we do so, it goes outside of parentheses and we distribute in. What words did I use before? Multiply a lead if needed. Okay. So I used the word distribute this time. Means the same thing. So I get 2x squared plus 8x minus 80. That's my standard form. Notice it's 1, 2, 3 pieces. The most special piece of this form is the negative 80. It's my y-intercept. We list that in parentheses. The negative 80 represents the y, and the x's are zeros. At this point, we also know our x-intercepts. They come from right here and right here. We always take the opposite in this case because we never want to date the same person as our x. So we're going to take the opposite of our x's in math. And we get 2 different x-intercepts. So as we move forward, I'm going to start to ask you a bunch of things. I'm going to start to ask you for what is the standard form? I'm going to ask you for what is the factored form? I'm going to ask you for what is the vertex form? I'm going to ask you for the vertex. That'll be in parentheses. I'm going to ask you for the line of symmetry or the axis of symmetry. That's going to be an equation, always an x equals. I'm going to ask you for x-intercepts. I'm going to ask you for y-intercepts. I'm going to ask you, is it concave up or down? And then I'm going to ask you to draw it. Okay, so I haven't had you practice drawing them yet. But if I was going to ask you to do one big problem for me, this is it. Now, with us learning from home, I might never ask you to do all of these things at once. Okay, I might just give you standard form and ask you for factored. But in the future, you're going to be asked to do this a lot in Algebra 2 Trig. So I do want you prepared to be able to kind of see all these different things. So I am going to lecture on them all, and I'm going to test you for the ability to go from one to one other type. Okay, today we practiced from factored to standard. It's not the first time you've seen this. We're reviewing. We're using that box to multiply. We're trying to get to the thing that has 3 pieces that we call standard. And we're still working on that vocabulary of like knowing that factored gives us x-intercepts, that standard gives us y-intercepts, that if there's a positive number in the front, it is a positive parabola that faces upwards. Notice that we didn't really graph today, and that's okay. We just still need to remember that this does make a U shape. Okay, so you have some Delta math for you to do online. Keep in mind that there are those features questions, and then I'm adding on the like factored to standard form.